Great.
Good day to all of our viewers. My name is Dr. Milchus, and I'm truly honored to have one of the most inspirational guests that you could ever meet. Jim LeBrecht is an award-winning American filmmaker, sound designer, and prominent disability rights activist based in Oakland, California. He has over 40 years of experience as a film and theater sound designer and mixer. And also the founder of the Berkeley Sound Artists. In recent years, he gained wider recognition as the co-creator with Nicole Newnham of acclaimed 2020 documentary Crip Camp, which explores the origins of the disability rights movement and was nominated for an Oscar. Jim, it's a major honor for me. Thank you very much.
Oh, I'm really happy to be here. Thank you, Emil.
No, thank you very much, Jim. And as we discussed earlier, before the recording, as disabled activists that attends United Nations meetings, that does advocacy in the highest political level, the work that we always do when we refer to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which each country developed, we we need to go back years, and the basis of what you yourself advocates, you with Judy Newman and all of those activists set the the standard, and you basically made a major difference, which was the basis of the United Nations Convention. And it's a truly honor, and we will basically go into the experiences of yourself as someone who went through this camp, Janet, that basically made a huge impact on your life, but also set the tone for a lot of activists of ourselves. But I want to go back, and the first question to you is, how was it like growing up in the 1970s, especially in the time where disability were unseen?
Well, I have to say that the difference between today and when I was growing up 50 plus years ago uh, is really stark. I mean, just imagine, no curb cuts. Imagine no protections for employment. Imagine uh, really that you could be discriminated against based on your disability with no recourse. And, I remember being a 17-year-old and driving for the first time, but, not being able to find, difficult to find parking spots. And I mean, all of these basic things that have come about in the last, since the signing of the ADA here in 1990. So, and I really feel like hand in hand with that was a sense of feeling, y- there was nothing really known as disability pride, or certainly I wasn't exposed to that until I went to Camp Jened at the age of 15. And Camp Jened was really where my life really kind of turned around. Meeting people like Judy Heumann, who was a counselor there, and other folks with disabilities, I had all of these role models. And, when I was growing up, Emil, I was really basically the only disabled person in my high school. Growing up, I was fortunate that I was going to public school, but I was really the only disabled person around. So um, I think this is a little bit of a long-winded answer to your question, but things are just radically different now. And I think especially living, depending on where you live, the effects of the ADA and being able to get into public accommodations, are just amazing. Before all of this, if I wanted to go someplace new, I'd have to call them and see if they were wheelchair accessible. I'd have to explain what that meant to them to find out. So, and I live in Oakland, which is right next door to Berkeley, which is kind of ground zero for really the independent living movement. And it is kind of remarkable that it's rare that I come across a restaurant or a place I can't get into.
It's very inspiring, Jim. I want to refer to, I remember you in the film Crip, and specifically if I want to go into the details of it, I remember specifically when there was a time when the government refused to put in ramps, making stations accessible for you. And I remember um, one of the first uh, instances where you and Judy Heumann and a couple of activists basically stopped the traffic in New York, and you decided, if I understand it correctly, decided that you would go basically to that specific um, march. And how did you? Because I remember you said that you went on the trains, etc. To basically go. As a disabled person in that time, how did you manage to do that? Because people don't understand actually the difficulty. I myself couldn't understand the difficult myself. They don't understand basically how challenging it was, especially in the time that you lived in. How did you manage to basically to find your way to New York? Because it was for you itself, it was a hell of a battle.
I lived about 20 miles north of Manhattan, and I, I was able to. Um, First off, I was very mobile at that point. I was born with spina bifida. I've never been able to walk, but as a wheelchair user, I was able to get on the train from Hartsdale, where I live, and so basically, I going to Grand Central Station, which is a huge train station. Normally, I could, if I could find a ramp to get up to street level. Usually somewhere around there, or I could find an elevator. And there was this rare day where I just couldn't, and so I had to, climb out of my wheelchair and basically climb out of on the steps, pull the wheelchair up, climb up to the next step, pull the wheelchair up. And I have to say that, you kind of have to do what you have to do if you want to do something important. And if you want to, be doing this kind of work. So I also had my grandmother lived down near Greenwich Village, which was 32 blocks south of Grand Central Station. And I used to try to visit her on many, many weekends. And I figured out kind of the route to get down to to her apartment. I kind of knew where the shortest curbs were, and I learned how to pop a wheelie up the curbs. Or I knew that if I went one block over, I could then go in a continuous sidewalk along a park. So I just, kind of figured my way down there. So, um, anyway, no subways were accessible, nothing. Now, today, in Manhattan, there are wheelchair accessible cabs. The buses are accessible. I believe there's a 30-year plan to uh, to make all of the subway stations accessible in New York, and it's a huge undertaking, but it's absolutely necessary.
Yeah, it is definitely. And what listening to you gives me chills because usually when we travel to other events, especially on United Nations level or Commonwealth level, they usually based on the United Nations Convention, one needs to get a personal assistant basically to be able to assist you because that is your reasonable accommodation. And and we don't understand basically how difficult it was for you because you were on your own and you were doing it
Yeah.
on your own. And and that showed specifically the resilience that you had and the fellow advocates as well to fight for a more inclusive and accessible society.
Um,
Yeah. So,
well, yeah,
yes, sorry.
yeah, no. Look, I think that when you're living with this and you're starting to see how people are not, willing to support your needs, that you're willing to do just about anything. And in reality, when you look at the 504 sit-in in 1977, which is chronicled in Crip Camp, it really was like this was a life or death situation. We really this rehab act had been signed, but they weren't enforcing these rules that said that if you receive federal money, you have to not discriminate. There was a nationwide coordinated set of demonstrations, and in the long run, San Francisco lasted the longest. And basically, people were putting their lives on the line. But if we didn't succeed here, Lord knows when we'd get a chance to get these rules signed. And really, 504 regulations were really the basis, building blocks for the Americans with Disabilities Act. And from there, we certainly look at the convention and its rules. So I was not there. I want to be really clear about something. I was not there during the sit-in, the 26-day sit-in.
Yeah,
I was finishing my senior year of college in San Diego. Um, but I when no, actually that wasn't my senior year. That was my uh, junior year. And but when the regulations were signed, I started seeing things happening within a number of months on my campus. And I started seeing bathrooms being modified. And I was part of a committee that was identifying where they were going to eliminate architectural barriers.
yeah. It's an amazing, and I actually realized when I think I watched Crip Camp like 10 times, and the first time that I got introduced to the film on Netflix was actually when my PhD supervisor actually informed me during my last stage of my PhD about the disability movement and especially what it took, the resilience it took for a disabled activist to fight for bigger purpose, and it was truly something eternal that needed to change because you fought against a masculine, ableist society. And we as disabled activists, we tend to, we portray resilience, but there are times where we feel that, we are giving up, and when we refer to Judy Heumann, she basically, and if I refer to your group as well, you were also part of it, although you weren't there in the sittings, you were part of that group as well in general. You guys showed the resilience that shaped that the disability movement throughout the world. And I want to ask you, and especially for a young self-advocate like me, what kept motivating you to basically to fight, to keep on going? What encouraged you to do it? Because it's you give so much for everyone. You give so much energy, but there are times where you just need to where you need to get out of bed, find the motivation.
Look, I think you could look back 50 some odd years, you could look at today. And there are days that um, when you see the current administration in the United States trying to roll back some of the regulations that allow us access to buildings. One of the first things the Trump administration did was they removed the sign language interpreters from the daily briefings. That basically that and there's a tax on Medicare and Medicaid that are um, uh, uh, that are they're going to lead to people not being able to live independently. And so when we look at kind of what was going on 50 years ago or so, you had the disability rights movement, but you also had the independent living movement. And the independent living movement is what spawned the first Center for Independent Living in Berkeley. Ed Roberts and a few other people started this organization that was providing services for people to find personal care attendants, to find a place to live, to get ramps built into homes, um, and so really these two kind of movements were really aligned very closely together. But the thrust of independent living movement was to get people out of institutions. That there were people living in horrible conditions who shouldn't be there. No one should be there. So I think that when you have an opportunity to affect change, you really try, you do get out of bed, and or you do that work from your bed. And nowadays, look, there was an extraordinary woman named Stacy Milburn who I got to know, and Stacy and a few other people started a movement called Disability Justice. And it was a way of looking at disability rights, but really from the vantage point of people who were not who were being discriminated against in society and even within disability. And so it was a movement started by people who were LGBTQ plus people of color, and Stacy and another woman by the name of Andrea Levant were running our impact campaign for Crip Camp. And an impact campaign is great. You got this movie out in the world. It's got really great um, um, uh, visibility. How do you take advantage of that to uh, um, educate people about the issues? And Stacy, there were meetings we would have on Zoom where she was sitting there in a wheelchair and she always had like, red lipstick on and, and such. And, but then there were meetings in which she was in bed and kind of on her side. And she taught me that there's nothing to be embarrassed about, is that you show up as best you can and that it's not unprofessional and that some days we um, have the ability to be more mobile, and other days you are, we have a term here, being out of spoons, and it's like I'm really low on spoons today, which means I'm really low on energy. And um, she just taught me that um, it's fine. And so I've had my health issues like everybody else in the world has health issues, and I grew comfortable being able to do Zoom calls from bed.
Yeah, no, no, thank you. Thank you, Jim, for that powerful statement. You know, in my preparations for this meeting with you, like I mentioned before, I watch Crip Camp continuously, and I actually realized until yesterday that you were actually the person that held the camera when you were in Camp Jeanette, because they referred to you as Little Jim. Is that correct?
I think it was young Jim,
Young
but
Jim.
yes,
Young Jim.
Jimmy. So there was one. Yeah, there was one. So look, these videographers. This is like 1971, kind of group of hippie videographers that just had this portable video equipment, and they happened to bump into some campers and counselors at a gas station near the camp, and they started talking, and long story short, they invited them to come over to the camp to film our Camp Olympics that we were going to have. And when they showed up, they initially couldn't get in because, as you see in the film, two counselors had gotten body lice, and it was decided that everybody needed to be quarantined. All the bed sheets into the swimming pool, tons of laundry, and we all had to shampoo with this shampoo just because they couldn't risk campers going home with body lice. People are sharing towels, they're sharing hairbrushes and such. So, but after chronicling that uh, moment at camp, one of the things they did was, yeah, they strapped the tape deck, video deck, to the back of my handlebars of my wheelchair, and I was holding the camera while somebody pushed me around camp. And I love technology. Anything that had the name Sony on it, I loved it. Radios or uh, you know tape recorders and such. So, um, uh, and in the long run, this group, the People's Video Theater, had 11 half-hour reels, open reels of video, and those tapes basically had not been digitized until about 45 years later. And that was right the time that we were starting, Nicole and I were starting to make the film. And we found out that these tapes were starting to be transferred to digital and restored just across the bay in San Francisco. And again, long story short, we got a hard drive one day of all of those reels, and it was just remarkable. It was remarkable to look back on 5.5 hours of footage from camp, which at that point was, about 45, 46 years beforehand. And for me, who loved that camp and went there for a number of years, it was like looking at like found home movies, and you're just wondering who you're going to see. And there were people at that camp that really, and a number of the counselors, you stayed in touch with outside of camp, and one of them, Jack, really kind of helped me through a tough period as an adolescent. So, but if you've seen Crip Camp, you know that there's this remarkable kind of roundtable discussion where we wanted to give a message to our parents. And um, when Nicole and I came across that footage, we just kind of like stopped watching and said, "Boy, if we can build our film up to this point in a way that it'll just be unbelievably remarkable." I have to say that I approached Nicole about making some films around disability, and I talked to her. Eventually, I said, I've always wanted to see some kind of film documentary about my summer camp, and she wound up. I sent her to look at some photographs from a Facebook page, and she went, "This place sounds amazing." But she said, "Let's make this film together." let's co-direct, let's co-produce. And she's a remarkably great filmmaker. I had been her sound designer on her three previous films, and so I really got to see how exceptional she is as a filmmaker. So it just wound up being an incredible collaboration.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. Jim, I see that we've got 8 minutes left, or 6 minutes left. So can I ask you that if we log off, can we quickly log back on the same link again? Because I've got a few more questions that I want to ask you, and I don't want to interrupt us. But I want to go back to Camp Jeanette. What made that such a unique space and empowerment of belonging for yourself?
Well, that time period was a incredible period of time of real social revolution. You know, uh, you had the women's movement, you had the gay rights movement, the anti-war movement was going on. We were questioning, really, as a society, questioning everything that was happening, and these counselors and staff members, they wanted us just to have a summer camp experience like any other kid might have. They didn't want to be overly protective or they didn't want to infantilize us. We wanted us to try to find ourselves, which was really kind of revolutionary. And so that created this, really helped me and so many other people really kind of get a sense of, really a better self of sense that was really positive, and I met my first girlfriend there, Nancy.
And your first
And
kiss as
I
well.
was, what's that?
Your first kiss as well. You had your first kiss.
Yeah, 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 and yeah, set me on a course for the rest of my life. But um, it was just revolutionary. Just also the sense of belonging was I had counselors there who were wheelchair users who were going to college, and Judy had prevailed in this lawsuit to get a teaching position, and it's just like it was just coming into this world in which you realize that just about anything was possible,
Mhm.
um, before being feeling like your choices were really limited. And when what everybody I think wants in this world is a life of their own choosing. But if you're being restricted by attitudinal and societal barriers and architectural barriers and such, it's hard to live independently and make that happen for yourself. But so I think that camp really taught me there was nothing wrong with me. There was nothing wrong with me being disabled. What was wrong was the outside world.
Yeah, that's powerful, eh? And that's why the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, they've got a slogan that says, "Nothing about us without us." And
That's right.
so when you look particularly at authentic representation and the voices of disabled people, what makes media and storytelling so potent?
Well, I've kind of worked in film uh, for a long time, and I've really seen the power of film and television to really kind of open up the minds of people in society and really make positive cultural shifts. So I really believe that it is through things like television and theater and film that if projects are being produced that are authentic, that are being made by people with disabilities, that we are going to start seeing the kind of stories that lessens fear about disability. I mean, we are here in society. We are, living our lives. But I think there's just a sense that people with disabilities are different from, on a very basic level, from people who are non disabled. And it's really not true. And so I think a lot of it is ignorance and just fear of the unknown. So that's why it's really important to you know, make films, make documentaries, make television shows with, you know, let's have more than one character with a disability. That's really not asking too much, but that usually is the case. And usually, if you see somebody with a disability in like a TV show, where it's like it's because of their disability, and things are shifting. They're definitely shifting, but this is where we're kind of, we've been coming from. Do you?
Appreciate it. So Jim, I want to ask you with regards to Judy Heumann. You know, you knew Judy very well. You were friends. You met at the camp, but you also knew each other personally as well. What kind of person was she? Because you needed to be a tough lady to be able to do the things that she's been doing.
Well, she was extremely determined, and wasn't about to take no for an answer. Um, and Judy also was from Brooklyn, New York, and people from Brooklyn are pretty tough characters, also. But I think she was motivated by her mother's determination to get her into public school. I think that was a good lesson. She was a family, her parents escaped Nazi Germany. Um, there were a lot of things that uh, kind of made up, I think, what was some of the fuel in her belly to do this kind of work. But she loved people. She would stay in touch with so many. You look when I met her at her job at the State Department before the government changed. Um, I think she had like three different phones. Whether it was her government phone or her personal phone. And if you talk to people that knew her, it's like you'd always hear from her, like every week or so. It's She would just call um, and so I think that she had a very strong sense of what is fair or unfair, and really wanted to grasp the power or the notoriety that she had, and this movement that she helped foster with other people. There were many people involved in this movement, but um, she really just wanted to really just push for human rights. It really civil rights, human rights, and I think this is a question, you know, uh, that I've been thinking about a bit myself as I think back on her. Really, what was this motivation? Um, in the long run, I think she really, really cared about people. If I'd be hanging out with her, or we'd be going down the street somewhere, she'd be recognized by people, and she would like stop and talk to them for 10 minutes. And there wasn't any little kid that she didn't want to engage with and talk with. Um, so um, I think that family, I think her um, Judaism was important to her in her life, and family, her love with Jorge was very, very important. So if you add up all these little pieces, what motivates you? What motivates you is, or what was she like? I come to the word love and just determination. Also, look, when she was very charismatic, there were people that didn't always agree with her, but other people that really, really did. And so she really helped pull together a movement of people, really a big community. I think that's kind of a rambling answer to your question, but um, uh, I'm
Y-
thinking about her as just as an activist, but also as a friend.
Yeah.
I mean, when we would talk on the phone, we would talk about like trying to lose weight and what did you eat this week or what did you eat yesterday? So I had half a bagel, and we also talked about her love for for Junior's cheesecake, so which was a fabulous cheesecake, and so in fact for Christmas this year, this past year, I had a cheesecake shipped to my house from Junior's in her honor.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. And yeah, it's nice and it's brilliant that you guys are that you especially you that you are that you're keeping a spirit alive and that being good friends with her. Jim, I want to ask you an important question, and that would be one of my last questions to you. Is that look, referring to you in South Africa, look, we are basically in a very young, we are in a very young stage of our disability rights awareness and our very young constitution when you look particularly at disabilities. And I want to ask you, is there any advice that you would give us, referring to, your experiences and the fellow advocates like Judy? What can we as self-advocates do to fight for the same? Um, for the same, because let me tell you, like I mentioned to you before in preparations for this, the film Crip Camp encouraged me to organize a very big march for neurodivergence last year with Special Need Cafe, which is the organization that our family has, our mother and Sammy. My wife Sammy, we tend to fight for disability rights. But what we did, we organized a big march to the union buildings, which is our um, kind of our Senate, and we basically um, we handed over a memorandum of inclusion for neurodivergence rights to our government, our Department of Disabilities, and we didn't hear anything since. In fact, I think it's next week. It will be the 1 year anniversary. Is there any advice that you can give us? Because there's a reason why I asked you about giving up hope, and the resilience. Because you need to be, if you think about the time, look, you can't compare the times out now compared to what you guys went through because it's a totally different world. But is there any lesson in this, and what can you give us as disabled activists? What can we fight for, and what's the future? Because we are very new in this thing, as a country as a whole.
Well, I have the advantage of looking back and having really just by making a couple of different films, kind of seeing what I think the motivators were. Certainly, your march, and that sounds incredible, Emil. That sounds amazing that you gathered all these people. It is continuing to be in the face of politicians. It's continuing to put pressure upon them to change the laws. And look, we don't all have to be out on the street. Really there was civil disobedience that was happening. You know, to get certain laws passed here to improve transportation. There was a group in Denver in the mid '80s that was basically blocking city buses, and so and look, I don't know what it's like in South Africa, but I think that you have to make a loud noise, and that you continuing to build your community, and I think that we're stronger together. One of the lessons of 504 was bringing together people who are advocating for the deaf and people who are advocating for the blind or low vision and other folks with disabilities to all come together as a united front. And so I think you need to make yourself undeniable. And and I think that it's just applying pressure um, on politicians to be public about this and to follow through. There's nothing. It's indefensible to say it's too expensive to make the world more accessible, to provide support services for people with disabilities, when every country on this planet is spending huge amounts of money on military. And I also think that you have litigation, which is important. You have education about this, and I also believe the entertainment industry is also really important. Just there's just a lot of different ways that we can work this. So I don't think that's the most brilliant formula for making things happening, but I think that it is staying in community and really staying organized and finding a target that you want to really apply pressure to. We had things like the passing of the ADA, and we had that incredible Capitol crawl, and then a takeover of the rotunda, and the politicians didn't like that, didn't like how it looked. Good, I'm glad they didn't like how it looked. In the meantime, there was a lot of behind the scenes, um, um, you know, uh, forces involved with negotiating. I think that the passage of the ADA did have to do with certain politicians that really had skin in the game. They had Senator Harkin had a deaf brother. Senator Kennedy had an aunt
Yes,
or gosh, was it a sister who was put in an institution.
yes.
I mean, these were people who really cared about these issues, and you got to find those people and you got to work with them. So,
Yeah, yeah, no, thank you, Jim. Jim, I want to thank you for this conversation. Like I mentioned to you before, we don't necessarily understand the value and the contributions you made, and I just wanted to tell you as well, thank you for making this film Crip Camp because you made a big influence on my understanding of advocacy as a young South advocate, thousands of kilometers far, but also thank you for you and your friends from Camp Jeanette and your fellow advocates for making this world more inclusive and accessible. I want to ask one more question, and this is just a
okay,
short. Usually, at the end of these conversations, I usually ask the guests to reintroduce themselves, and just say the following words, to support neurodiversity. So you will introduce yourself, and then you will say, um, I support neurodiversity. Just to place emphasis because we're leading up to Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month in a couple of days'
yeah,
time.
yeah.
Oh,
Hey, so look, okay. So I'm Jim LeBrecht, and I was the co-director of Crip Camp with Nicole Newnham. Um, and I want you to know that I support neurodiversity, people who are neurodivergent. I think it's an extraordinarily important part of the wide umbrella of the disabled community, and that uh, the people that I've met from this community have been extraordinary people. And so, yes, absolutely, all the love and support I have, and I know uh, really here in the United States and in the organizations that I have helped to found, when we have a definition of disability, we're very clear that it includes people who are neurodivergent and deaf, as well as disabled.
Thank you so much, Jim. Really appreciate it, and thank you for your contributions.